adopt self-awareness, that will help you get better. Not saying you'll always be a champion, but you'll be better. That was quite a seminal moment in my life to then go forward and carry on working. I feel really lucky that life came along and gave me a bit of a smack in the mouth at a really young age, or a relatively young age, that you could do something about it. The more he sacrificed and the harder he worked, the harder he had to keep working, and the more he had to sacrifice. So he said there was no real joy in his life. That wisdom is available to all of us if we're open to it. If we have that curiosity, we can access it at any time.
Right, we are live. Welcome everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Coach Gerald Lami podcast. Today it's a special one. I always say it's a special one, but to be honest with you, today I'm really looking forward to this one. I'm joined by a professor, international speaker, 11-time author, renowned sports psychologist, podcaster, to name a few. Today I'm privileged to be joined by Damian Hughes. Damian, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Gerald. I've been looking forward to it. I know we've been trading quite a few messages in advance of this, but I'm a big fan of yours. I love the podcast. I really enjoyed listening during lockdown to your conversation with Alex Iwobi.
Oh, yes.
I thought that was really rich in insight, and some of the stories he told about Wenger and things like that. And but I think that was a testimony to your skill as an interviewer. So no, I'm honoured to be asked to come on. So thank you for having me.
Well, that's just put some fire in me right now to just to continue going, and I really appreciate those kind words, especially from someone like yourself. You know, that's like I said a bit earlier on. You know, you're an expert into this in this industry as well. So I'm really privileged.
No, I wouldn't describe myself as an expert. I think I'm a bit like what you're doing with it. You know, I think you're passionate and you care and you do your best, and that's all you can ask, isn't it? I think if people don't like it, well, your conscience is clear because you do your best with what you have and where you are. So I think that's true for both of us.
No, for sure. And exactly that, you know, in terms of the podcast, the reason why I did start it, obviously we've had a lot of time in our hands during lockdown, so it's something to keep me busy. But at the same time, you know, I grew up in Hackney. Originally I came from Albania when I was 8 years old to London. And I'd say, what
brought your parents from Albania? What was the story there?
It was in 1998 when the war was happening. So we had to leave Albania at the time. A lot of our family scattered around the world. So I've got a few family in America, Sweden, Italy. So we've all gone around at the moment. So it was from there. So in terms of like help, of course we've had help along the way, but in terms of the environment that we was in, I would say obviously you have to kind of fend for yourself. And again, the whole reason for the podcast was to kind of give an insight to individuals and especially someone like yourself who's been doing it at a high level. A lot of my demographic that will be listening to the show, some of them might not even know that there's an opportunity to work in this sort of field. And that was another reason why I wanted to start the podcast, because where I've grown up, it's a few things. Either you become a sports person, either you're actually a footballer or a boxer or anything like that, or musician or something like that, or you can go down the wrong road. So for me, it was a thing where, like, you know, can I open up the doors to invite different guests, you know, someone like yourself who's working in the psychology department, international speaker, writing books. You know, for a lot of people, as much as it sounds like, oh yeah, that's doable, but a lot of people don't really understand, you know, there's a lot of work to be done behind the scenes. And also some people don't even realize these things are actually tangible. You can actually do these things. So, you know, again, going back to thank you again for coming on the show and things like that. You know,
no, not at all. I mean, I think the background you described there that you grew up in when you were in Hackney, having come over from Albania, Gerald, I think there's a lot of common ground there with my own story. So I grew up in North Manchester. My dad was a boxing coach, and like most boxing gyms, they're often in sort of quite poor inner city areas, and that was certainly the case where we grew up. And as you said, that comment there about, you know, it was often seen as a couple of ways to get out of there. You have to be a good footballer or you could fight. Mm-hmm. There wasn't many singers that came from there. or then you go down that route of looking for less obvious ways, or less legal ways of doing it. And I remember when I remember years ago that I went to sort of start working in the boxing club when I got older, and we did a survey once with the kids. They were about 14, and I describe it as a survey. It was just an informal thing where we asked the kids to fill in some questions, and we said, "What job do you want to do when you grow up?" And the most common job was to be a footballer, right? But the second most common job was to become a drug dealer. Now, they didn't describe it as being a dealer. They said they wanted to work for a dealer that was operating on the estate. And we were devastated. When we first got the response, we thought, oh God, like what? It was a reflection of us and the poor job that we were doing because we were trying to raise aspirations for the kids and things like that. And when we sort of took a pause and reflected on it, what we realized was that all those kids were telling us was that they wanted out of their lives and their careers, they wanted to be fairly rewarded, to make a few quid. They wanted to be respected. They wanted to be good at what they did. They wanted to have some kind of credibility. And it was all the stuff that we all want out of our jobs anyway, but they saw footballers as having the ultimate of that because we're saturated by the coverage of it. But with the second best alternative, with all due respect, they don't see authors, they don't see business people, they don't see academics, but I'll tell you what they do see. There's a guy driving around the estate in a pimped up Range Rover, cruising around, that looks like he's loaded, that looks like he can do what he wants, that gets plenty of respect. And what it forced us to do as leaders within that context is the purpose of your podcast, which is to try and challenge people's aspirations, their view of the world, and say there's a wider world out there than what you might think there is. And I feel really lucky that like I was blessed with sort of brilliant parents that refused to let us go down that route of like, although my dad was a boxing coach, he realized very quickly that I wasn't very good at it. And he said, you're going to get hurt, you know, if you carry on the boxing. But he sort of insisted, him and my mum, that we worked hard at school, that we were respectful to our teachers, that we tried our best at whatever we did, even if we didn't show much aptitude at it, you still have to turn up and do your best. And I think that's been the sort of approach that I said it at the start for this, that, you know, I'm doing a podcast as well, and I feel out of my comfort zone doing it, you know, like, because I don't really know what I'm doing, and I feel like but then what I sort of reassure myself with is the messages that my mum and dad gave me when I was a kid of, am I doing the best I can with what I've got and where I am? Have I done my research? Am I being respectful to the guests that we meet? And if I can answer yes to that, well, I'll go, well, I can only just put it out there as doing that. And I think that's why I really admire what you're doing with this podcast. You're passionate, you care, and you're trying to help people, which all those things spoke to me when you originally invited me on. So thank you again.
No, I appreciate it again. And it's like, by the way, I've got my pen and pad out because I know you're going to be dropping some gems. So I've got to write it down, and I'd suggest anyone else that's
listening. Now the pressure's on.
Anyone that's listening, make sure you're doing the same. But it's funny enough that you've, in terms of the kids that you said, you know, the survey that you put out, and do you know what? In a different environment, I was one of those kids also where, you know, I was playing for Northampton at that time. At 16, I wasn't offered my contract, and I would go back to my area and I would see the older lot, you know, in nice cars, like he said, and I'm thinking, well, I'm turning up in Northampton's training ground. I mean, it's not the most prestigious clubs out there, but in terms of being professional, it's a professional club, you know. So, I'm seeing the older lot from my area that are driving bigger cars than some of the first teamers at Northampton. And when I did get released at that time, and I had a few things going on at home with my parents and things like that, and it was a thing where I was like, you know what? Well, I'll just follow these or what they're doing, because they've got the nicest clothes, they've got the nicest things around them. So why can't I do that? And it was only then where, you know, my mission and my goal, I steered completely left, you know, and you could see that wasn't my character, to the point where obviously I was losing friends, even myself. I got stabbed, and I was, you know, critically in hospital. And it was only till then I realized yeah, I started to realize, you know what? This is not my goal. This is not my passion. This is not what my parents have sacrificed to come to this country, have taken a loan to get us into this country, by the way. For me just to throw it in the face like this. And it was only then where again it hit me where I had to learn the hard way. And I said, you know what is my purpose? What do I need to go and do? And it's like football is my passion. I've been doing it since I was knee high, and it was like, all right, cool, I need to get back into it. And I had to rebuild myself again. It was like that was a journey. And like you said, it's got me here now where I'm still out of my comfort zone. I'm having these conversations, where public speaking was never my thing. I remember in school, anytime the teacher would call out my name and say, Gerald, can you read out this sentence or anything like that, my face
Yeah.
will be completely red. I'm a tomato, mate. Like, do you know what I mean? And it's like, even now, before I start my podcast, I'm a bit nervous. I find myself a bit nervous, and I'm thinking, why are you nervous? Because, like you said, I'm only trying to give good information out, for people to listen, especially for people in my community. So, um, it's not really a question. It was just more so, yeah, just a bit of an
No, I
observation
think
on
it's
what you
powerful.
said.
But, well, can I ask you a question then? Because you said that when you were sort of reflecting, having been stabbed and like thinking about this isn't the person you are and who your parents brought you up,
Yeah.
and you said you went back to your purpose, and then
Mm.
you said football is a passion, and I get that, but what's your purpose? Because it seems to me that football is your vehicle
Yeah.
to do something greater than just football. What is it that you would describe your purpose to be?
I believe that my purpose is to give information. Again, my life experiences that I've gone through is to give something good to the people. Again, what you said in terms of, again, is just using football as a tool, to kind of navigate through life and show them, what, we can use football as a vehicle, but also to build people, to build character, to build self-esteem. And a lot of these things, I suffered when I was younger, where I didn't have confidence. I didn't have that self-esteem within me. And it's only football that brought that out of me, where I remember in school, in secondary school, my English wasn't the greatest. And, I would come to school, I'd have, like we call it jack-ups and white socks with shoes, it's like,
Right.
you're not the coolest person in the building. And yes, and it's only until I was playing football, where one of the popular guys at the school, he'd seen me and he was like, you know what, you're actually a really good player. And he told the sports teachers and the football team teacher, and he was just like, you know what, we need to get this guy on the team. And it's only then that I started to realize, you know what,
Brilliant.
I'm gaining confidence, and people are starting to recognize me and things like that. And it's again, going back to your question, I feel like with my purpose, I'm still learning in terms of purpose and what I'm actually here for. But I do know using football as a tool to kind of reach people, especially people in my circumstance. And yeah, just doing things like this.
Brilliant. Good
You
on
know what
you.
I mean?
Well, I
So
really admire you. I think it takes real courage to ask yourself those questions that you've
yeah,
obviously asked, and to reflect on that, and then to be able to actually put it into practice, not just
yeah,
talk a good game, but actually go out there and put yourself out there, which is what you're doing. So
no, for
I'm
sure.
sure I'm sure, like the kids you work in Oman and the people
Yeah.
that listen to this wider sort of get a lot of inspiration from you, because you're living a really great example, Gerald.
No, I appreciate it. And let me ask you that question. Do you feel like you've got a purpose, and have you found it?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. So I think the purpose that really drives me is so from a personal and a professional point of view is to help people, give them the tools, and help people to go further than what they necessarily believe they could. And some of that comes from my own background that I just shared with you. But then about how I go about doing it, I'm really clear that I've got three behaviors that, um, if I'm going to live a life that's true to myself, I've got three non-negotiable behaviors that I just won't compromise on. So the first one is you act with kindness. So
Hmm.
you start from you acting with kindness towards myself, but when you're kind towards yourself, you can be kind to others. So you can express empathy, you can have understanding. You know, you can understand somebody's story, where they've come from, and understand that most people wouldn't do the best they can. The second one is I do things that are fun, and because if it's fun, it'll interest me, and if it interests me,
Yeah.
I'll go deeper, and it'll intrigue me. And then the third one is that I have to feel I can make a positive difference to any situation. So there's a great quote that says, if your presence doesn't make a difference, your absence won't be noticed.
Wow.
Because it's like
Yeah.
like nobody knew you were there in the first place, so
Mhm.
nobody would miss you if you wasn't there. So I feel like I have to make a positive contribution, and if I can't do any of those three things that drive this idea of trying to help people go a bit step further than what they believe, well, that means that you won't get the best of me, which means that I'm not living my purpose. So only as I've got older have I sort of reflected to go, just say no, because that helps you say no to some situations, you know, but equally it helps you to say yes to situations where you think, right, you're going to get all of me here. I'm going to throw myself into this and do the best I can.
Mhm. That's crazy that you said that quote, because me and my missus was talking about that quote the other day. So you saying it's kind of reconfirmed what we was talking about. But to speak about those three attributes or three traits that you said: kindness, fun, and making a positive difference. How does someone find those attributes within them?
It's a really brilliant question, but you've answered it yourself in what we spoke about earlier, that when you start to think of moments where you felt like you were being the person you could be, so you
Mhm.
described it as, you know, maybe you didn't feel confident when the teacher was asking you to read out loud, or you were in the playground and you didn't fit, like you get your white
Yeah.
socks and you and and your shoes on.
Yeah.
But then the moment that somebody threw a football on the playground and
Yeah.
you were there in that moment, what was really interesting was listen to the way you described it. So you weren't describing football, you were just describing you being at your best.
Yeah.
You were saying I was confident, I was making a difference, I was being the person that I wanted to be. So I think that's how you start to find it. I think we all have moments where like there's a famous psychologist called Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi that
Mhm.
talks about this flow state. And what you described in many ways was that flow state there. But what I'd say is that without having to worry about, well, what does that mean? It's just, what are the moments where you find yourself completely absorbed in something, when you're just completely happy and
Mhm.
you've thrown yourself into it. Now, I call that, when I work with people, I talk about success leaves clues. So I say, when you've been really good, what does good look like? How do you behave in that moment where you're being really good? So you look at moments where you've been successful. This might be, you know, you were getting on really well with your missus, or it might have
Mhm.
been um, something about you did really well at a project at school, or you think about the best game you've ever played in football terms, and you just break it down and say, well, so how was I behaving? And then when you start looking at other occasions where those behaviours were present, you
Mhm.
inevitably start to see a pattern that go, so when I show up like this, I tend to enjoy myself, and when I enjoy myself, I tend to do better than when than when those behaviours are absent. And I think but that takes reflection, and we have
Yeah.
to do that personal reflection to find those moments, and then understand that they become behaviours then that we don't compromise on, that we
Mhm.
might. I'll give you an example. I got asked recently if I'd do a job, and it was during lockdown, and it was a corporate job, and I'll be quite honest, it was quite a lucrative job to do. But then they started telling me what I needed to do, and first of all, it bored me. I thought,
Yeah.
this sounds really boring. It sounds like a slog to do it. But then I was thinking, but you know what? Like sometimes you've got to do that. And then the people I was working with were being pretty unpleasant in the way that they were making their demands and the way they were talking to me. Then they were changing the goalpost. And in the end, I said to my missus, I was talking to her, and I went, you know what? Um, I don't feel that the people I'm working with respond to me being kind.
Mhm.
So I don't. So it doesn't encourage kindness. It's certainly not fun, and I'm not sure that I can make a positive difference with this anyway. So my missus went, well, you've got to turn it down then.
Mhm.
If you're not going to be a bullshitter
Yeah.
and you're going to be true to yourself, you have to actually put your money where your mouth is, because lots of people talk a good game, like we're saying, but I think a really good way of testing somebody is to say, let me see your diary and let me see your wallet. So where do you spend your time and your money? And then I'll tell you what your priorities are. So I can tell you this. I can say to you, oh, I believe this, but I'm proud of that example only because it was a good reminder to me to say, well, put your money where your mouth is at.
Yeah.
Turn that job down, even though it could be lucrative. Turn it down because you're going to be 60% at best of the person you could be by working on it. And I think that's an important test for us. As we get older, you reflect on it, and then you start to become hopefully smarter in your decision making about the situations you put yourself in.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting point that you made there in terms of obviously trying to find that within you. But a lot of people sometimes are not self-aware. How does someone, train himself to become a little bit more self-aware? Do you feel like we have it within us to find these answers, or is there a bit of a mixture of both? Going to do the work, reading books, and then having that intuition within inside of you.
I think the latter answer is probably most helpful for people to go. It's both. It's not either we know it all or we have to go and seek external help. I think it's both and. I think we have our great intuition and our own experiences, but then we marry that up with knowledge that we can gain, whether it's from books or from podcasts or from talking to other people. I think it's a combination of it. But self-awareness comes from, like, people often say, oh, as you get older, you get wiser. And I go, well, I don't think so. So I've met loads of stupid old people, but I've met loads of really smart young people as well.
Yeah.
So it's not, I don't think age necessarily confers wisdom, but I think self-reflection confers wisdom on you. If you're prepared to, you do something, and then if you're prepared to give yourself a bit of time to sit down and think, did I do the best I could there? What was the reasons? And you don't immediately look to point the finger and say it's his fault or it's their fault. You go, no, hang on, let's think about myself in this. Like, I'll give you an example. We did on the podcast series, the High Performance podcast that I do with Jake Humphrey. One of the first interviews we did was with Robin van Persie.
Yeah, I watched that one. Brilliant.
Yeah. And there's a brilliant bit in it where he was talking and he said, and the clip that I'm going to tell you about went viral, so it's been viewed now over 5 million times. And I think it was viewed 5 million times because I think so many people know this is an intuitive truth. But to hear a guy like him that's been successful say it was, during the interview, he said, can I tell you a conversation I had with my son, Shaquille, who's 14? And we're like, yeah, please do. And he said his son had been playing for Feyenoord under 14s, and he hadn't got off the bench in this particular game. And when they were driving home, his son was slagging off the coach. He was slagging off his teammates, the opposition. And Robin said he pulled the car into a lay-by and said to him, we need to have a conversation, son. And he said, I'm your dad. I love you. And I'll always love you. So don't have any doubt about that. He said, but you sound like a loser.
Wow.
He said, all I've heard you do is point the finger at other people and blame other people. And I haven't heard you once mention yourself in this reflection. And he went, and he said, if you want to live your life like that, you better adjust your expectations to that of a loser. And he said, but I'll still love you because I'm your dad. He said, but if you want to live like a winner, he said, you have to start looking at yourself first and foremost. You have to start taking responsibility for yourself and asking yourself, have I done the best I can? Did I show up well? Was I giving my absolute all? And he said, and that's what winners do.
Yeah.
And he said, no, your choice is really simple. You can either go down the route of living like a loser, or you can start embracing the ways of being a winner. And he said, but be assured, I'll still love you as your dad. And then it was such a powerful way because there's so much in that one extract. That the first thing he did was he established psychological safety. So he wasn't saying, you need to be successful for me to love you. He was saying, I love you regardless of anything that you go on to do. So you've always got my love. That isn't up for debate. But then he gave him that profound message of self-awareness.
Yeah.
He said to him, you have to be self-aware. If you adopt self-awareness, that will help you get better. Not saying you'll always be a champion, but you'll be better tomorrow than you were today. But if you're only ever going to be blaming it circumstances or anyone else, his point was you're going to live a life of constant frustration where it's always somebody else's fault and it's always outside of your control.
Mm.
And I think that one extract, why I say I think it's gone viral, is because I think there's an eternal truth at the heart of it that relates to the question that you've just said, which is about self-awareness can be developed in us, but sometimes we can become blind to it because we choose not to do it. It's easier to externalize it and point the finger, whereas any of us can develop that self-awareness. Absolutely.
Mm. No, it's interesting. Yeah, definitely. You guys probably don't need me to say, but yeah, check out that the podcast anyway that Damien and Jake have got at the moment, and that clip again with Robin. It was an intriguing clip like you just mentioned, and just to kind of take it back a little bit, Damien, in terms of your background, like you said, your father was in a boxing industry. How does a young lad get into sports psychology or self-development?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I should just clarify. So I'm not a sports psychologist, Gerald. So
Okay.
my background is in organizational psychology.
Okay.
But I do work in sports, so
Yeah. Yeah.
it often gets misunderstood in terms of the work I do. So I'm an organizational psychologist that works in sport.
Okay.
So sport, but how do I get down that route of academia? Yeah. So as I said to you, I grew up in the boxing gym, so I was constantly around sort of high performance. So when I described the environment, my dad was training guys that went on to win Olympic medals, guys that became world boxing champions at it. So I was around real high performance, as well as kids that just wanted to come in and sort of get fit or find a place where they felt safe and secure.
Hmm.
So so that was very much my playground. And as I say, my dad sort of identified very quickly that being a boxer wasn't a route that I was going to go down
Yeah.
because I lacked the skills to do it. So he encouraged. I was going to say push, but it wasn't being pushed. Him and my mum really encouraged myself, my two brothers, and my sister to sort of. They always felt that education was the way that you bettered yourself.
Hmm.
Do you know what I mean? Like, as we
Yeah.
were
Yeah.
saying, like your background in Hackney, seeing football or boxing as the route out, my parents felt that education could give you just as good a chance. So they encouraged us, and I got really lucky that I ended up getting a scholarship to a grammar school in
Okay.
in the area because we could never have afforded to go. But I got this scholarship there, and I was so fortunate that I went to a place where they tried to um, nurture the child that they saw. And if I'm honest, I rejected the chance for the first 3 years that I went there. I just felt completely out of my depth, and I felt like I was um, I was a bit of a fraud in that environment. And the way that that manifested itself was that I'd sort of be the cheeky one, the class joker, and
Hmm.
I'd almost walk around with a bit of a swagger on me. And I ended up getting expelled. So I was a bit of a harem scarum, and I ended up getting into a fight, a number of fights. But there was one fight I got into where I ended up hurting the kid, and the school just booted me out. And that was a bit like the Robin van Persie example with his
Yeah.
son. The trauma of it was horrendous. And what saved me was, despite now this is a bit of a random story, but I was an altar boy um, at the Catholic Church
Okay.
near where we grew up. Now, those two things might sound incongruent, that I was being like an idiot at school, and yet I was then on a Sunday serving on the altar at
Yeah.
Mass.
Yeah.
And what had happened was, just before I got kicked out, I was on the altar one Sunday, and a teacher from my school came to this particular church. Now, um, he had no idea what I did, and he saw me on the altar, and I could, even now I think back, and he was looking at me thinking, this guy's an idiot at school, and yet I can see him here looking like all pious and
Yeah.
religious
Yeah.
on the altar. And I could see that he couldn't quite square the circle. And then shortly afterwards, I got into trouble where, as I say, the school kicked me out. And this particular teacher phoned up my parents. So he found out my parents, and he phoned them up, and he found out that my parents were incredibly good people. As I say, they were working in the community,
Mhm.
that they were trying their best, and they really valued education. And they knew how devastated my parents were. And he promised that he would speak up at the school to see if he could get me um, to get the expansion annulled, and that I was suspended instead. And this particular teacher went and spoke up for me, and the school agreed to do it. And I was literally on the last chance saloon. So this teacher came to my house and said, "Listen, I put my reputation on the line for you. You better not let me down."
Mhm.
And like, my parents were furious at what I'd done and saw me squandering the opportunity. So I was about 14, Gerald, and that was my moment, like Robin Van Persie had with his son in the car, where I remember
Yeah.
sat in my bedroom that night and just thinking, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to keep getting into trouble. I don't want to be the idiot. I don't want to be the one that's constantly fighting and
Mhm.
causing pain at home for my mum and dad. So I made a decision then. I thought, I'm really going to knuckle down and just try my best. Whether that's good enough is
Mhm.
irrelevant. I'm just going to give my best. And I think that was quite a seminal moment in my life to then go forward and carry on working. Now, I still had that fortune that I was still working within sort of sporting environments with the boxing club and things like that, but I was then marrying it up with the academic side. Now,
Mhm.
I'll tell you a nice sort of square in the circle of it was that many years later, I mean, I'd been left to school a long time, and then I got my professorship from Manchester Met University, and
Amazing.
in 2010 this was, and the the local paper, the Manchester Evening News, phoned me up to do a piece about it, about like local lad gets this professorship. And in the course of the interview, the teacher said, "Oh, what school?" The reporter had asked me what school I'd gone to, and said, "Oh, was there any teachers that made a difference?" And it was a really nice opportunity to go back and talk about this teacher called Mr. Council. Said there was two of them, Mr. Council and Mr. Wood, played a massive part. They saved my life. They turned my life around. And I said, then you know, they saw a potential in me long before I recognised it, and
Mhm.
I'll be forever eternally grateful for them. And what was lovely was both teachers got in touch with me,
Oh, wow.
um, like that had long retired. So one of them asked me if I would go and speak at his retirement dinner, which I was like thrilled to do.
That's
But the other one,
incredible.
Mr. Council, like he's in his mid-80s now. But since that, so over the last 10 years or so, I take it, he comes round to my house, or I take him out for a meal at least once a year, because I'm conscious of his age
Yeah.
and sort of some of his challenges. But I take him out once a year, and it's just my way of sort of paying respect
Yeah. Yeah.
to somebody that, like, 30 odd years ago, stood up for me when he didn't have to do it.
Mhm.
And but I think it was a proper big lesson for me that that one, it's a case of, it doesn't matter where you come from, it's where you want to go to that's key.
Mm.
And what was also significant was almost like choosing your friendship groups really carefully. I think the friendship groups that I'd fallen in with were the ones that used to love me, being the idiot, being the one
Yeah.
that would go out there with a big mouth, or go out there and get into a fight and cause a bit of drama. Whereas once, what was significant is when I tried to knuckle down and behave myself, those people didn't want anything to do
Yeah.
with me.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And it's
Yeah.
like, it made me realise that I thought I was only of value for you when I was being the idiot.
Mhm.
When I want to go to where I want to get to, there's no value for you, so you don't want to have a piece of me. And I think I feel really lucky that those lessons, sort of, life came along and gave me a bit of a smack in the mouth
Yeah.
at a really young age, or a relatively young age, that you could do something about it. Because you see, like, I see it now. I've got two children, and my son, he's only 11, and he plays, and he plays soccer and he plays rugby and he does it. But I go along, and I always just stand on my own on the side to go and watch him, and I enjoy doing it. But I see so many kids where you go, life hasn't come along and given you a smack in the mouth yet, that they're
Yeah.
being cheeky to referees, or like, if they're playing a team where they're better than them, they almost go out of their way to try and humiliate the opposition or do
Mhm.
something unpleasant. And I look at these kids and I go, life is going to come along at some stage and give you a bit of a wake up call.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure you're ready for it yet. because we're all going to get one.
Yeah.
For you, it may be a bit that moment you were stabbed. For me, it was when school came along. But for so many people, I say, don't wait for trauma to happen. Don't wait to get stabbed or wait to get kicked out of school. Start reflecting a lot earlier and learn that, like, life's giving you the lessons a lot earlier. You just open yourself up to learn them before it becomes too late, or you find yourself in too deep a hole.
Yeah, and that's incredible stories that you just shared with us as well, and it's pretty. It's not strange, but it's amazing to see how, you know, different walks of lives, and it's like we've gone through similar things. And I'm sure a lot of people can relate to it as well. But like the last bit that you said there, because I was just about to ask you, do you feel like people kind of have to go through some sort of wake up call, or because I remember when my dad used to speak to me and he would tell me certain things. He would say, you know, if you do this, this is going to happen to you. But for me, it was a thing where I was like, I need to go through this myself. I kind of need to learn this the hard way. And I don't know why I was always like that, but I'm sure there's a lot of people out there like that also. But yeah, do you feel like people actually have to go through something themselves for them to actually learn?
Yes, I think it's valuable, but I also think, but you don't have to. I don't think you have to. I think for some people they do, and they will learn from it. But it's like, I don't know if you've ever met somebody that's been diagnosed with an illness, like quite a serious illness, and then they've got better on the back of it, and they become nicer people, or they have a greater appreciation for simple things in life. And what's frustrating for me when I see that is I go, you could have done that before the illness, but it's taken an illness to force you to appreciate it, whereas that appreciation was always available to you. But maybe something had to come along and challenge your sense of mortality before that happened. Or, you know, like, I don't know if growing up, when like you had kids that would drive like maniacs when they were driving cars, and then they have a bad car crash, and then suddenly become more cautious driver, and you go, why did you have to wait for that car crash to happen? You know, so I think you don't have to go through trauma for it to learn. But for many of us, when it happens, we have to then be open to it. So again, I'll just sort of reference that on the podcast series, we interviewed Johnny Wilkinson, the England rugby player.
Another brilliant
one. He spoke, thank you. Well, he spoke so powerfully about that. He said he just felt that it was about hard work and sacrifice. And what he realised is the more he sacrificed and the harder he worked, the harder he had to keep working, and the more he had to sacrifice. So he said there was no real joy in his life. And he said he just kept ignoring it. And then he said life kept coming along and giving him serious injuries. So he said he had 14 consecutive injuries. And he said, and I just didn't learn. He said, I'd sort of train my balls off, come back after a 6-month injury, and within half an hour, I'd get another injury and rule me out for 3 months. And he said, and life was saying to me, here's a lesson for you. And he wouldn't learn it. So he'd come back, and then life would go, here's another one. And he still didn't learn it. And he said it took 14 consecutive injuries over 4 years before he finally went, maybe this is me. Maybe I need to do something different here. And I think there's something really but that wisdom is available to all of us if we're open to it. If we have that curiosity, we can access it at any time. Like I'll often hear people that they'll go, I don't know if you see this in sort of professional sport, but you might speak to somebody and they'll go, well, how many first team games have you played? And you go, well, why does me playing a game make my opinion more valid? Do you see what I mean? It's almost like you can learn off anyone if you've got that open-minded curiosity. But if you only believe that there's certain people that can teach you, like you're missing out on so much wisdom. I remember Alex Ferguson saying it many years ago about Ryan Giggs. He said, Ryan Giggs will listen to anybody if he feels he can help him improve. But he said, but he's also got a built-in bullshit detector in his head that means that he gets rid of the useless bits. But what really impressed me about is Ferguson telling that about Giggs was that he was prepared, he was open enough to listen. Whether he agreed with you or not is different, but he was always open to listen to how he could improve. And I think that that wisdom is available to any of us. We don't need trauma. Is a a long way of
Yeah.
answering your question.
No, that's incredible. It's incredible that, the way you explained it. And again, the references that you've made, it's these players are, or individuals are at the highest level of their careers. So for them to be so open and be willing to learn from sort of anybody, and like you said, filter the good stuff and the bad stuff, is like, it comes with experience. I feel like, do you feel that sort of attributes comes with experience?
Again, I'd go back to that question. It can do, but you have to marry up. Experience has to be married up with reflection.
Yeah.
So you have an experience and reflect on it, and then you say, right, I wouldn't do that next time, or I would do that differently.
Mm,
But if you never do the reflection bit, you can have the experience and still go
yeah.
back and do the same and make the same mistakes.
Mm,
You know, I often think it's like, now I know you live in Oman, but you must see expats that come out there and say, like, they're trying to speak to a local that
yeah.
doesn't speak English as a first language. How does the typical expat deal with that communication difficulty?
Google Translator, you would have to, yeah, just try your best.
Yeah.
Hand
Now you're being
signals.
innovative. Yeah.
Hand signals.
Or do they speak slower and shout louder? Do
Yeah,
you ever
bit of
see
that
that
as well.
happen?
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And they don't understand
So when you're
anyway.
speaking slower and shouting like, yeah, so you're going,
Yeah,
so you're speaking slower and louder, but they still don't understand you, but you're
yeah,
just wasting energy and becoming obnoxious in the process.
yeah, yeah.
And how many of us do the same thing in terms of we speak, we don't try and change our language, we just shout the same language louder.
Yeah.
So that's somebody that's having an experience, but there's no
Mm,
self-reflection to think, how do I get Google Translate out? How do I try
mm,
and find a different way of communicating?
yeah.
That's the self-reflection bit that you described.
Yeah, incredible. But I want to take it back to when, your first sort of client or team that you was working with, and kind of
Yeah.
just what was that feeling like, and what was you experiencing at that time, especially again going into that environment where maybe you might not be known as yet to, in your field. What was that like?
It's a really interesting one. So so what I did was, so I should have explained that. So I worked as a coach for a long time.
Mm,
So I did football coaching, then I did boxing coaching, and then I went down the academic route and pursued that. So I went on to university, and then I carried on at night school for a while, and then I went into the corporate world because I thought I needed to get a proper job. So
mm,
I'd met my girlfriend, who was my wife now, and I was thinking that I'd seen lots of coaches that were how would I describe this? That what worried me was I love coaching and I was really
yeah.
passionate about it, but I was worried that what would I do in 20 years' time if I lost that passion? And I was worried that I didn't want to be a bitter coach. I didn't want to be someone that was going through the motions.
Mm,
And I was worried that uh, if I ever lost that and I hadn't tried to do other things, I might end up finding myself stuck.
mhm,
So I started thinking about like other jobs. And I didn't know there was other jobs. Like I say, my background was you're either a footballer or a boxer, and I'd gone down the academic route and I was involved in sport in some way. So if you'd have said to me, go and work in marketing, I couldn't have told you what marketing was. Or if you'd have said, go and work in finance, I'd have gone, I don't like maths. Do you know
mm,
what I mean? Like it was as stupid a response as that. And my girlfriend said to me, she said, well, you're not really qualified to do a lot in the corporate world. She said, but you've got coaching, you've been sort of studying organizational psychology. She said, why don't you sort of go down the route of working in human resources? Right. So I said, what's that? And she said, well, it's about sort of people development, but businesses do it. So I started applying to different companies, right? Saying, like, just being honest, saying, this is my background.
yeah.
I'm prepared to work hard. I'll try my best. And there was a big company called Unilever that went, oh, this sounds interesting. So they took me on, right? So I told my mum, I said to my mum, I said, I've got this job in human resources. She said, what's that? I said, I don't know. I said, I want to find out. So my mum said to me, and this is a question that only your mum can ever ask you. She said, what are you going to do when you get found out? Right. So I said, oh, I'll work out a plan. But I was always thinking I was going to get rumbled. I always thought like somebody would come along and say, you shouldn't be doing this job. and fire me. So I went in there with the attitude of I was going to learn and I was going to work really hard. And I went back to night school to do more of the studying that I felt would complement it. And every time I kept thinking they were going to they were going to sack me. Like I'd get a phone call off my boss and he'd say, "Can you come in tomorrow morning? We need to chat." And I'd come in and I'd be expecting to get sacked, and they kept promoting me. Right. So the last job I did was I got promoted to this position called Human Resource Director out in South Africa. And that was the moment when I realised I'd been promoted to my level of incompetence. Right. Because I realised I was just going to be sat in meetings all day. I remember sat there thinking, I hate meetings. Yeah. I'm not a person that should be put in a meeting room and asked to sit there for a day. That's just not who I am. It just drags my energy down and I can't make a positive difference. I can't be curious and have fun. Some of those trademark behaviors. So I resigned and I set up my own consultancy. Now, I'd already written a book on the back. I'd already written my first book called Liquid Thinking. So I resigned and set up this consultancy. But because I'd still been involved in the boxing coaching and things like that while I was doing all this anyway, I got friendly. This is a long way of explaining how I got there. But I still had contacts in the sports world, and I was friends with a coach in rugby league.
Okay.
It was he was a very famous coach in UK rugby, and I'd got really friendly with him over the years. So me and him used to meet up once a month and go for a few drinks, and we just used to sit and talk about some of his challenges as a coach and what he was facing and things like that. And I just used to sort of bounce ideas around with him. So when I'd left this corporate job, he phoned me up and said, "Would you come and support me?" So this was the first time that I went into a dressing room, like under my own steam, if you like.
Yeah.
So to answer your question of, I felt like because I knew the coach was really good, and he'd said to me, "I don't let many people come and speak to this group of players. So I'm confident that you speak the same language. It's the same philosophy." So I had a bit of confidence because I had this relationship with the head coach. But what was really good was one of the players, who was a very senior international, spoke to me before I went in the room, and he said, "Listen," he said, "we're good people in here, but don't bullshit us. Don't use long words. Don't try and be clever. Make it useful. So if you're going to work with us, make it useful." And I thought that was a really valuable lesson that I'm still using today. Of don't try and come and be a smart ass. Don't give these people theory if they don't want it. They're intelligent people. So speak to them in a way that gives them something useful they can take away and do something practical with. So I felt really lucky that it was a brilliant sort of grounding, because I had strong relationships and I liked the people that I was working with, but they were really good at offering advice, and I was really open to take it.
Amazing. And you spoke about your first book, Liquid Thinker. What does that mean to you, being a liquid thinker?
Yeah, so the idea behind it was, the title of it was that I felt that most people get stuck in their ways of thinking. So they become very solid. They go, "Oh, that's the way to do it. That's the only way. Why are you not doing it like this?" And I thought that, having sort of met some of these guys and been around the ones that seem to be doing really well, it was the ability to be fluid in the thinking and say, there's not only one way, there's lots of ways. So let's be flexible, let's be open, let's be creative. So that was the idea behind coming up with the idea of being a liquid thinker. I thought it was just a really powerful visual image of, don't get stuck in thinking there is only one way. But the story behind why I wrote it might be of interest to you, Gerald. That,
of course,
when I said to you I was doing this job, so that book, Liquid Thinker, was never intended to be published and read by anybody outside of. So the idea behind it was that when I was doing this job in human resources, a lot of my work was around, as I say, my background now is in organizational psychology. So it's about how do you create high performing cultures and teams. And I was running some factories just outside of Liverpool, right? And I did the job for nearly 3 years. And the plan was, we tried to turn performance around. So we didn't get rid of anybody, but we tried to create a culture where people just delivered really high standards of performance. And over 3 years, we did it. So we turned it round. So it was one of the worst factories in Europe, and it ended up becoming in the top 5 best.
Oh, wow.
And so over this 3-year journey we'd been on, when I knew that I was going to leave, I wanted to almost give them something that was that allowed them to carry on the work that we'd done.
Mm-hmm.
And I was trying to think of a suitable book that captured a lot of the messages for it that I could just give them as a manual. And I couldn't find one, because the challenge was these were guys that maybe their education level wasn't so high, but they were smart, intelligent people.
Mm-hmm.
So if you gave them an academic textbook, they wouldn't read it. They'd just go, oh, I'm not reading that. But if you gave them something that wasn't of substance, they wouldn't read that either, because they were cynical.
Mm-hmm.
So I was trying to find a book that sort of had some academic knowledge in it, but made it accessible, that was practical. And I couldn't find it, so I decided to write the book myself. So I thought, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll just write it, and I didn't know what I didn't know. So I wrote the book first of all, and I made a list of people that I liked and admired, and I thought I'm going to go and interview them.
Mm-hmm.
So the list of people was like Muhammad Ali, Alex Ferguson, Richard Branson, right? These are all like just a dream list.
Yeah.
And then I thought, who do I know that knows them? So I ended up approaching them, and these guys were really generous. So I got to interview all those people I just described, right, and talk to them with their ideas for the book. But even when I'd written it, I shared it with one of the blokes that works in the factory, and he went, "This is bollocks." He went, "Richard Branson's parents were wealthy people," and he went, "Muhammad Ali, he was already physically gifted. Alex Ferguson, he's been lucky." So they always had an excuse, these guys, for why these people were fortunate. So what my idea was, I went, you know what I want to do? I want to interview guys that work in the factory,
Wow.
because there's some guys that works in the factory that have got brilliant stories. So
Mm-hmm.
there was a bloke that he wanted to give his kids the best education he could, right? Because he left school at 15, and he said, I want my daughters to have a better chance than I had. So to get to his daughters into the best school where he could, he had to move house. He couldn't move house. So what he did was he bought a plot of land, right, for next to nothing, that was in the catchment area for the school. And he spent 4 years building this house from scratch to move his family in,
Wow.
to get his daughters into his school. And I was like, that's an amazing story. And that's a guy building his own empire like Richard Branson built it, but he's building it for his family. There was another bloke that he was like, on his weekends, he was a motorbike champion. I was like, well, that's like Alex Ferguson. All the stuff he describes, he's like what Alex Ferguson does. So I started interviewing these blokes, and so what I did was I put them in the book, right?
Wow.
So in between the chapters, there's a story about this guy that works in the factory that built his own house, or there's another guy that sort of built a canal boat. And then what I did was I produced the book, and we gave it out to all the blokes in the factory, and it was mainly blokes, but we gave it to them as their manual, and they couldn't dismiss any of the messages, because when they were reading it, they went, "Oh, no, Steve," or "I know Andy that works in the factory." So that became almost their Bible to go and make change happen. So the book was, I only did like 500 copies for these blokes and left it there.
Wow.
And then people started hearing about it from outside of the company. So I started getting people writing saying, can I get a copy of this book I've read about? So in the end, the publisher approached me and said, can I buy the book off you? So I sold it, and I gave the money from that book to my dad's boxing club.
Incredible.
So I gave it there to do that. And then that was the start of the journey of writing the books. I really loved doing it. And my wife had always said to me, she said, you're a secret geek. And I said, what do you mean by that? And she said, you love sort of researching and writing books. You just try and pretend you don't. So I thought, yeah, I'm going to embrace my secret geek. So
That's amazing.
So I've loved writing books over the years since, but that idea for the very first book, it wasn't ever intended to be a book that I was going to sell to anybody. It was just an idea of that I targeted an audience that I felt could use it.
Wow, mate, that's an incredible story that you've just shared, and I'm definitely going to read that book as well myself. And we'll put the links below as well for people to check it out. But just the list that
But I mean, what I would say is, sorry, Gerald, if I can just jump in there and just say that I'm conscious that, when people if people are listening to this podcast, they're being very kind and generous and giving their time up to listen to it. And I wouldn't want anyone to think that we're now trying to do a sales job on them.
Nah, not
Because
at
I don't
all.
know about you, but no, but I don't know,
Yeah,
but this goes to my own voice. I
yeah,
hate people that try and say, "Oh, read my book because all the answers
yeah,
are in there."
yeah,
Because that's not the point of this. If people have given up an hour of their time, that's a valuable hour that they've
yeah,
spent. So,
yeah.
so I don't want people to listen to think, "Oh, here he comes with a sales pitch." That's not what I'm doing. It's more, I'll tell you the story about it, but people don't need to read the book if they, but I certainly feel like we're trying to sell a book to them.
No, not at all. I feel like, do you know what it is? What we spoke about earlier on in terms of like that self-development, like you said, it's in terms of books and just those stories that you've just mentioned. For me personally, I would love to just read those stories and especially because it's more so, in quotes or whatever, normal people that have built, such great things, where you always hear the Richard Bransons and the Sir Alex Fergusons of the great things that they do, but you don't really hear of the sort of normal people doing greater things, which is amazing. For me, that's amazing, a read. But I totally agree with you. It's definitely not a sales pitch, but yeah.
Good,
but
thank you.
but just the list that you said you had Sir Alex Ferguson on there, you had Richard Branson on there. Like, where did the confidence come to say, these are the people I'm gonna target?
Yeah. Well, I think you don't know what you don't know. So
Yeah.
if you'd have sat me down and said, "Here's how you write a book," I honestly would have gone, "Oh, I'm not going to bother with that. It's too hard."
Mm-hmm.
But nobody ever sat me down and told me that. So I didn't know what I didn't know. So I thought, well, I could do that.
Mm-hmm.
And then you stumble your way through it. So like I read that book now when I occasionally look back at it and I go, you know what? I wrote that, I think it's like 16 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And there's some bits in it now that I look back in 16 years later and go, you know what? I wouldn't have wrote it in that way, or I would have said something different in that way. But I go, but that was me 16 years ago writing
Yeah.
it. Today, do I feel that I've got better? Well, I think I've improved. I don't think I'm the best writer ever, but I certainly feel like I've improved from where I was 16 years ago, because
Mm-hmm.
I've gone on that journey myself of just learning how to write and try and explain myself better by doing that, trying it, and then reflecting on it afterwards.
Yeah.
So I think there's some bits in it that are me 16 years ago, in terms of that is decent enough, but could be better, if
Mm-hmm.
I'm honest. But the stuff about approaching those guys, like say Sir Richard Branson, or like somebody like that, I think it was a case of, I thought I'd heard that phrase about 6 degrees of separation, and I thought, who do I know that knows them?
Mm.
And then if you work backwards from there, like I'll give you an example, that when we wanted to interview Muhammad Ali, right, it turned out
Yeah.
I was one person removed.
Wow.
Right, and I'll tell you what the connection was. That when I was a kid growing up, a couple of times, my dad was very friendly with Angelo Dundee, that was
Mm-hmm.
Muhammad Ali's coach, and Angelo had come over. My dad had gone to Miami over the years, and they were friendly. So I thought, hang on, I'll say to my dad, "Do you know where have you got Angelo Dundee's details?" And he went, "Yeah." So I wrote to him in Miami, and he phoned me up and he went, "Yeah, I'll
Wow.
do my best to arrange it for you." So you go, well, so you could start by going, "Oh, I don't know anyone," or how do I do that? And then when you
Mm-hmm.
go, well, how do I not do that? Let's work out a way and take small steps, rather than just assume um, that the the answer's no. Let's
Yeah.
take the small steps and see if we can find a slightly different way of doing it.
That's
And
incredible.
that's been, again, but again, that's only consistent with what I found in those podcast interviews that we mentioned. And again, I'm repeating these only because, like yours, they're free for people to listen.
Yeah.
Nobody's trying to sell to them.
Yeah.
But on the podcast interviews, where we've interviewed people like, we interviewed a lady in the last series called Baroness Michelle Mone,
Mm-hmm.
right? She's a Scottish businesswoman that was hugely successful. And all her stuff, the way she was describing how she was successful, was about just starting off going, that's what I want to do. And
Mm-hmm.
then taking small steps. Take a small
Incredible.
step that moves you forward. And then if that step doesn't work, find a different step that then keeps you moving. But it's that idea of just progress and keep learning.
Mm-hmm.
But accepting, you know what, sometimes it goes wrong. Sometimes you make a mistake. Sometimes you fall on your ass.
Yeah.
And that doesn't define you. That's just a disappointment that you brush it off, and then you carry on your taking those small steps.
No, for sure. So you'll be definitely getting a few messages from me then, Damien, about getting a few of your guests on my podcast. But
Yeah, but I think what you're already doing, like I know the one that really sort of resonates with me was the one where you interviewed Alex, and you
yeah,
go, well, you're one person removed from Arsene Wenger now.
yeah, that's true.
If you think of it in that way,
Yeah, yeah.
so ask him if he can get you Wenger.
Well, mate, I'll be down his phone as well. There'll be a few people that have been asking, but that's the thing about it though, Damien. It's exactly what you said, because at that time, when I first started, it all started with with my the connections that I had through my phone book, and it was like you said, it kind of a snowball effect. All right, cool. This person knows that person. It was like, all right, cool. Alex knows one of my best mates. All right, let me ask him, and it was just kind of it just all goes like that. So yeah, it's incredible. You just got to kind of have an
So you're
idea and go
asking me,
for it.
but you've already demonstrated it. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
that's
Like
true.
I'm happy to do, but you're a better example than I am because you're already demonstrating it and you're doing it in real time.
No, likewise as well. Likewise as well. But just a quick one, Damien. Yeah. I'm just gonna go into some quick fire round questions with you. If that's all right.
Oh, go on.
Yeah.
Yeah, go on.
They're not. Yeah, but yeah. Favorite moment of your career so far.
Oh, wow. That's a tough one. I think doing the books. I think so. If I
Yeah.
can choose, I would like asking me to choose a favorite book is like choosing the favorite child.
Child. Yeah.
They've all. I wouldn't do that, but I think just doing a book has been immensely satisfying because I feel like I'm making it up as I go along in terms of learning the process.
Mhm.
But the amount of work and effort and commitment that goes into doing it, it always feels like really satisfying then. And then I've been fortunate when people have sort of read a book and have dropped me a line afterwards and said, "Oh, this I found this really helpful or
Mhm.
this useful." I find it really humbling. So doing the book and people finding it useful then speaks to my sense of purpose. So I'll mention that if that's okay.
No, perfect. Perfect. Next one. Favorite team or person that you've worked with.
Ah, wow. Well, I'm a Manchester lad, and my team is Manchester United. So I've whenever I've worked with them, and I've been fortunate enough that I've done some work with them over the years. There's some really incredible people there. So I'd say that just because it's my team, and
Mhm.
you feel like you can support or help some of the people involved in it. So I've been really fortunate that I've got a, a good relationship with Ole Gunnar Solskjaer,
Mm.
and a bit like what you were describing, that Ole was very generous that came on the podcast,
Yeah. Yeah. That was a good one.
and yeah, we just had a chance to chat, and I think people got the chance to listen to him and go, you know what, he does know what he's talking about, rather
Yeah.
than listen through the media lens of the media making a comment on him. Listen to him tell you
Mm.
why he does things or his decision making. And so anytime I've been fortunate enough to go and work with people at Manchester United like Ole,
Yeah.
is always a pleasure just because it's my team, it was my dad's team, it's my family team. So
Yeah. That's
yeah, that's
amazing.
the answer to that one.
No, and again, this is the whole purpose of the podcast as well. It's like you're not actually playing, but you're part of your favorite team. Do you know what I mean? And it's like this is not part of the fire round questions, but someone that wants to go into the industry that you're in at the moment, what steps do they need to take first and foremost?
There's not really an industry in terms of what so I suppose the industry I'd say is I occasionally work in sport, in the support staff, but I tend to work with the coaches.
Mm,
And like I say, I'm not a sports psychologist.
yeah,
My background's in organizational psychology. So that's a bit of an unusual path in
yeah,
terms of that. But if you wanted to go and work in support um, staff with teams, whether it was in like the psychology department or the
mm,
medical department or things like that, one is obviously get your qualifications that get you in through the door.
yeah,
But secondly, go and just volunteer your skills to teams that can't afford you. And what do I mean by that is go and do it for like your local team or your local non-league team, or
Mhm.
go and offer your services, because I did that for a long time, even while I was working in the corporate world. So I was doing stuff because of I was involved in coaching anyway, and I'd go and offer to give my time up to like non-league teams
Yeah.
or people that need it. And part of the reason for that was because if you're doing it for free, people tend to be grateful for you. So, and they tend to be more understanding. So you can make lots of mistakes in that environment, and people tend to be a little bit more forgiving.
Mhm.
But those experiences, so like the example you asked about going into that rugby dressing room, you know what? Like walking into a dressing room full of cynical professional athletes can be intimidating. So go and sort of learn how to walk into a room and
Yeah.
engage a group of players long before you ever getting paid for it. Do you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
give up your time and your skills to go into um, teams that couldn't afford your services. Get experience, and then make your mistakes early, make them fast, learn from them, and then you've got something then that can hopefully open the door to anyone listening to this to maybe go into professional sport.
Mhm.
Or equally, you know what? Like you might go into those sports environments and go, "This isn't for me," and that's
Yeah.
fine as well.
Yeah.
You might go, "You know what? I enjoy it as a hobby, but it's not something I would want to make
Mhm.
a living from." And that's a really powerful tool to make yourself aware from.
Mhm.
But I mean, that's part of the reason that I don't work full time in sport. I do a number of other stuff like the podcast, the
Mhm.
books. I've got a consultancy that works in business and education as well. And part of the reason for that is that I feel that just working in sport wouldn't necessarily get the best out of me. I like the
Okay.
variety of other jobs. So I'd say to anyone listening to this, just come put yourself out there, try it, make your mistakes, make them quickly, learn from it. But equally, it might be something that says there's a different route where your skills and abilities can take you.
That's incredible. You've created your own lane basically, and that's something that a lot of people in life don't tend to do because of life pressures, and like you said, they go against their values and things like that. So it's incredible to hear someone like yourself, created their own lane, and anyone that's listening, you've got a blueprint right here in front of your face.
Well, I mean, that's really kind of you. I appreciate that. I wouldn't say it's necessarily my own lane, but it's certainly the thing that works for me.
Yeah,
That
yeah,
I remember thinking like, and again, this is the reflection bit we talk about. But if you went back and asked those teachers, um, the ones that I described that had
yeah.
sort of turned things around for me and said, "What sort of kid was I when I started knuckling down? What sort of kid was I?" And I did ask them this, but I, I had reflected on it beforehand. They said I ended up being a nice kid, but I was a pain in the ass. And I was a pain in the ass because I was always asking questions, or
Yeah,
I got bored easily. So as an adult, I think I still get bored easily. So if
yeah,
I can have a variety of different things to work on, when I go in and do something, you can do it and give yourself and give everything and
yeah,
behave true
yeah.
to yourself, because I've got because I like the curiosity of doing stuff. So that taps into that fun behavior of
Mm,
making it interesting. And I'd say that to anybody. Don't underestimate the value of doing something that you in because you just enjoy it. You know what
yeah.
I mean? Rather than and I know that might sound like a smart ass comment. People go, "Well, how do I pay the bills?" Or "I've got kids to look after." You go, "No, I appreciate that,
Yeah.
but don't relegate happiness and fun too far down that
Yeah,
list
yeah.
behind all those other things."
No, amazing, amazing. Last one for you, Damien. Best lesson you've learned in the last 6 months.
Wow, that's a good one, because obviously we've been going through lockdown,
Yeah,
which has forced us to do it. Uh, the best lesson I've learned would be something around being kind. I think being kind is one of the behaviours that I spoke about that I apply to myself. But I think just being kind generally to that lots of people are struggling, and it's not always so evident. I think when people are locked down, you never know. There's a great quote that says, "Be kind, because everybody you meet is fighting a great battle."
wow.
And I think there's lots of people that may be having difficulties, whether it's relationships, whether it's family, whether it's jobs, whether it's professional, personal, it almost doesn't matter. And I think when you come at life through a lens of just being kind, I think that gives you the capacity to try and understand somebody's story and
Mm,
therefore try and help them or at least show empathy to them. I think when we come at it through a lens of being judgmental, I think we lose that capacity. And I think the last 6 months have shown us how, as a society, kindness is has got to be at the core
mm,
of who we are and what we stand for.
mm. Ladies and gentlemen, Damian Hughes there. That was incredible. Like literally, honestly, Damian, that was amazing. Again, thank you for taking out your time and coming onto the podcast. And literally, I could sit here for another couple of hours, but I know obviously we've got things to do as well. But I would love to, hopefully once I come back to the UK and we can have a sit down face to face and possibly do this,
Love it.
in person. So Damien, really, really enjoyed it. Whoever's been listening, I hope you've enjoyed it. I'm sure you've taken a lot from this episode. And we're not selling it, people, but we'll put down the information for Damien and where you can check out his stuff and everything in the description. So please do check it out because it's an incredible man, incredible knowledge. Worked with some of the best people in the industry and why not? If you're definitely looking to improve yourself and self-development and things like that, this is definitely a man I would recommend to get some wisdom from. So, Damien, again, thank you very much.
Oh, well, thank you. And I mean what I said at the start of this, it's a real treat to come on and chat with you, Gerald. I think I really identify with the difference that you're trying to make. So thank you for having me on and thanks for your kind words as well. I'm humbled,
Anytime.
but incredibly grateful.
Cheers, mate. Thank you.